On a quiet August night in Los Angeles, Marilyn Monroe lay alone in her Brentwood bedroom while the world still believed she was untouchable, wrapped in the protective illusion of Hollywood glamour. By dawn, she was gone, leaving behind an empty space that the entertainment industry could never truly fill, sparking an era of endless speculation. The official ruling said one thing, attributing her sudden demise to a self-administered overdose of barbiturates, but those who knew her best never stopped asking questions. Decades later, Frank Sinatra would quietly share what he believed truly happened behind those closed doors, and his chilling version did not match the simple story of a lonely woman giving up. This alternate perspective suggests that the legendary singer possessed insider knowledge regarding the darker forces operating within the shadows of the entertainment industry and American politics. To understand the tragic conclusion of her life, one must look past the studio publicity photos and examine the grueling reality of a woman trapped by her own success. Marilyn was caught in a web of conflicting medical advice, intense studio pressure, and dangerous relationships with men who wielded immense power. Her final months were a chaotic blur of crumbling health, canceled contracts, and frantic attempts to reclaim her narrative from a media machine that chewed her up. A woman who couldn't sleep was fighting an invisible enemy that no amount of wealth or adoration could conquer, an exhausting struggle against her own mind. By the early 1960s, Marilyn Monroe was no longer just a movie star. She had transformed into a complex cultural phenomenon who carried the financial weight of entire studios. She was a global symbol whose image moved massive amounts of money, dictated fashion trends, and shaped the very fabric of post-war international culture. Major Hollywood studios relied heavily on her bankable name to secure financing for risky projects, knowing her face guaranteed massive box office returns. International magazines built entire covers around her trademark smile, recognizing that her presence alone could sell out print runs within hours of hitting newsstands worldwide. Audiences filled theaters to absolute capacity simply because she appeared on the poster, expecting to see the carefree blonde bombshell they had fallen in love with. But inside the quiet hours of the night, when the glaring production cameras were gone and the roaring applause faded into silence, Marilyn faced something terrifying. She struggled with chronic insomnia, a debilitating condition that she could not perform her way out of, no matter how brilliant her acting skills were. Sleep was not a luxury to her. It was the ultimate currency of survival, the essential foundation upon which her entire career and well-being rested. She firmly believed that proper rest preserved her radiant beauty, her sharp professional concentration, and her increasingly fragile emotional control during intense filming schedules. Without a solid night of sleep, she felt completely exposed to the harsh judgments of a critical industry that demanded perfection from her at all times. As her fame intensified and the spotlight grew brighter, her underlying anxiety grew into a monstrous presence that haunted her every single day. Stage fright had followed her relentlessly since her early rise in Hollywood, a hidden torment that few fans ever realized existed behind her confidence. She often described the overwhelming dread she felt right before filming began, an almost paralyzing fear that she would completely forget her lines. She worried constantly that she would disappoint everyone in the room, from the demanding director to the exhausted crew members waiting on her performance. That deep-seated fear did not disappear after achieving monumental international success. Instead, it deepened and took root in her psyche as time went on. With every sensational headline and every new million-dollar contract, the stakes grew astronomically higher, leaving her with absolutely no room for human error. At first, powerful sedatives seemed like the perfect medical solution to an otherwise unmanageable problem, a quick fix for a mind that wouldn't stop racing. Barbiturates were commonly prescribed by mainstream physicians and widely trusted by the general public at that particular time in American medical history. Doctors handed them out like candy without the extreme caution and rigorous testing that would later come to define modern psychiatric practice. Marilyn naturally began taking them to quiet her racing thoughts, desperate for even a few hours of artificial peace before the next morning call. When these heavy sedatives inevitably left her groggy and completely disoriented during the day, powerful stimulants were introduced to artificially restore her energy. This destructive chemical cycle, down at night and up in the morning, slowly and systematically rewired her body's natural circadian rhythms over the years. What started as a temporary medical treatment quickly evolved into an unbreakable daily routine that dominated her entire personal existence. What was once a welcome source of relief soon turned into a severe chemical dependency that altered her personality and compromised her physical health. Her psychiatric care reflected the flawed medical culture of the era, which favored lengthy exploratory talk therapy combined with aggressive pharmaceutical experimentation. Freudian psychoanalysis completely dominated her intense therapeutic sessions, forcing her to spend hours analyzing her chaotic past instead of stabilizing her present. She spent endless hours dissecting her traumatic childhood abandonment, her deep-seated fears of rejection, and her persistent, crippling feelings of personal inadequacy. Yet, this intense emotional therapy was rarely separated from heavy medication, creating a volatile mix of psychological vulnerability and extreme chemical manipulation. Different psychiatrists offered different clinical labels over the months, ranging from borderline personality traits to what they then called manic depression. Despite the lack of a clear, unified diagnosis, the highly addictive prescriptions kept coming from multiple sources without anyone intervening. During the final months of her life, official medical records show she had access to a staggering number of potent psychoactive medications. Pentobarbital was the primary sedative used to force her body into a state of unconsciousness, regardless of the long-term cognitive consequences. Chloral hydrate was also present in her system in massive quantities, despite later frantic claims from one physician that he had never prescribed it. The dangerous overlap of these powerful drugs was not carefully controlled or monitored by any centralized medical authority or trusted personal advisor. No single doctor appeared to be fully monitoring the total picture of what she was consuming on a daily basis, creating a disaster. By the time she completed work on the set of The Misfits, the devastating physical cost of this lifestyle was fully visible. The production itself had been incredibly emotionally draining, characterized by extreme weather conditions, relationship breakdowns, and constant production delays that exhausted everyone. The film ultimately failed commercially upon its initial release, adding another massive blow to her already fragile self-confidence and professional standing. She underwent major surgery for painful endometriosis, a chronic condition that had caused her immense physical agony throughout her adult life. Shortly after that difficult procedure, she had her gallbladder removed, further weakening an immune system already battered by years of substance abuse. Hospital stays became frequent occurrences in her life, providing temporary refuge from the press but fueling rumors about her mental stability. At one point she was admitted to a psychiatric ward for severe depression, an experience she found deeply humiliating and profoundly frightening. She felt entirely betrayed by the medical system that was meant to protect her, realizing she was viewed as a patient to manage. Tolerance to strong barbiturates develops quickly, requiring the user to constantly increase the dosage to achieve the exact same sedative effect. For someone who had taken them for years, the line between a therapeutic dose and a lethal dose narrowed dramatically over time. Close Hollywood insiders observed rapid, unpredictable mood swings, where moments of radiant charm and laughter were followed by hours of dark withdrawal. She could be vibrant and engaging in the afternoon, only to become completely despondent and uncommunicative by the time evening arrived. Yet Marilyn stubbornly maintained to her friends that she knew her own limits, refusing to believe she was in any real danger. She insisted she was not being reckless with her health, genuinely believing she understood exactly how much chemistry her body could handle. That confidence was tragically misplaced, as her internal organs were severely weakened by the constant onslaught of toxic pharmaceutical combinations. As her physical health weakened, professional tension within the Hollywood studio system increased to a point of absolute crisis for her career. She was publicly criticized for her perpetual lateness, for her extreme difficulty focusing on set, and for being entirely unreliable to producers. High-ranking studio executives framed her genuine medical struggles as mere irresponsibility and diva behavior rather than a legitimate, debilitating illness. The immense pressure to prove her professional worth only intensified the vicious cycle of anxiety, insomnia, and heavy, unmonitored self-medication. The woman who had once effortlessly controlled the camera now struggled daily just to control her own volatile internal body chemistry. The nights grew longer, the silence inside her home grew heavier, and the walls seemed to close in on her life. While the world still saw a dazzling, unbreakable star, Marilyn Monroe was fighting a lonely battle that no spotlight could ever illuminate. Her Brentwood house, which she purchased after returning to Los Angeles from New York, was supposed to be her sanctuary from fame. It was a modest Mexican-style home, far removed from the mega-mansions of her Hollywood peers, reflecting her desire for something real. To Marilyn, this property represented true independence, a place where she could finally plant roots and build a stable, quiet life. She wanted stability more than anything, hoping that owning her first home would signal a fresh start for her personal well-being. She had recently been honored with a prestigious Golden Globe Award, recognizing her status as a favorite among international film audiences. On the surface, it truly seemed like the perfect historical moment to rebuild her fractured career and show her critics her strength. She began work on a new comedy titled Something's Got to Give, a major project meant to signal her triumphant return. Instead of a triumph, the film quickly became the absolute center of a toxic industry controversy that played out in public. Just days before production was scheduled to start, she developed a severe, painful sinus infection accompanied by an extremely high fever. Multiple independent physicians confirmed she was genuinely ill, advising the studio that forcing her to work would endanger her long-term health. The studio executives, desperate to keep the expensive project on schedule, flatly declined the medical recommendations and demanded she show up. Cameras rolled anyway, forcing a sick, exhausted actress to perform under bright, hot lights while fighting off a serious physical infection. When she predictably failed to appear on set consistently during the following weeks, executives immediately launched a vicious public relations campaign. They framed the issue entirely as personal irresponsibility, leaking stories to gossip columnists that portrayed her as an unstable, washed-up actress. Headlines followed that negative narrative without providing any medical context, turning public opinion against a woman who was fighting for health. The tension escalated dramatically in May when she traveled to New York to sing at President John F. Kennedy's birthday celebration. The appearance was brief, but the global publicity surrounding her iconic performance in that sparkling dress was nothing short of explosive. Her breathless performance became instantly iconic, yet it also intensified intense media speculation regarding her secretive connections to the Washington elite. Federal authorities had already kept extensive records on her during her high-profile marriage to the intellectual playwright Arthur Miller. They viewed her with immense political suspicion due to her association with left-wing intellectuals and political activists during the Red Scare. Now, with persistent rumors linking her to the most powerful political figures in the country, government scrutiny intensified significantly. What had once felt like harmless public admiration now turned into an invasive, paranoid nightmare that haunted her every move. Every movement she made, every private phone call she placed, and every delay on the movie set carried deep political undertones. By early June, the studio decided to make a highly public, brutal move to protect their financial interests at her expense. She was officially fired from the film and sued for massive breach of contract, with damages reaching hundreds of thousands. The carefully crafted narrative pushed to the mainstream press focused entirely on her alleged drug dependency and uncontrollable emotional instability. Yet when they attempted to replace her with another actress, the entire production ground to an immediate, costly halt. Her loyal co-star, Dean Martin, flatly refused to continue filming with anyone else, forcing the studio to shut down entirely. The very same studio executives who had publicly blamed her for everything began reconsidering their aggressive strategy behind closed doors. Cold financial reality forced a wave of corporate pragmatism, as they realized they needed her star power to save the movie. Negotiations quietly resumed, and Marilyn managed to secure a much better contract that gave her more control over her projects. In the final weeks of her life, Marilyn worked aggressively to repair her damaged public image through strategic media appearances. She granted exclusive, candid interviews to major publications like Life magazine, speaking openly about her struggles and her career goals. In these interviews, she appeared remarkably composed, deeply thoughtful, and eager to move past the drama of the studio system. Ambitious plans were actively being discussed not only to resume filming her interrupted project but to headline several major films. For the first time in many months, professional momentum appeared to be shifting back in her favor, offering hope. Privately, however, the intense psychological strain of this corporate warfare was deepening her reliance on dangerous pharmaceuticals to survive. Her private prescription logs from those chaotic months show an alarming pattern of overlapping medications prescribed by different doctors. She was consuming multiple sedatives, chloral hydrate, various barbiturates, and strong stimulants designed to counterbalance the heavy, sluggish side effects. One of her primary physicians later vehemently denied ever prescribing certain lethal combinations found within her bloodstream during the autopsy. The terrifying chemical complexity inside her physical body perfectly mirrored the absolute chaos and betrayal waiting just outside her front door. Professionally, she stood on the very edge of a brilliant redemption. Personally, she was thoroughly exhausted and emotionally hollowed out. The vast gap between her public expressions of optimism and her private experiences of fragility widened into a dangerous chasm. By early August, she had regained a measure of control over her studio contract, but sleep remained completely elusive. The immense pressure that followed her into that modest Brentwood house did not disappear when the security gates closed behind her. On the fateful morning of August 4th, Marilyn stayed home, attempting to manage her affairs amidst a wave of exhaustion. She met with an influential photographer to discuss the publication of exclusive nude stills taken during her recent film production. She received a relaxing professional massage, spoke warmly with several close friends on the phone, and signed for various deliveries. Present in the house that day were her dedicated publicist, Patricia Newcomb, and her live-in housekeeper, Eunice Murray, monitoring her. According to Newcomb's later statements, Marilyn had not slept well at all and was visibly irritable throughout the morning. Her controversial psychiatrist, Ralph Greenson, arrived in the afternoon for an intense, hours-long therapy session designed to calm her down. He asked the publicist to leave the premises and later requested that the housekeeper stay overnight to monitor Marilyn's state. Early that evening, she spoke on the phone with Joe DiMaggio Jr., who later reported sensing absolutely nothing unusual. Shortly afterward, she phoned her psychiatrist once again to share trivial personal news, sounding relatively calm and grounded to him. Later that night, actor Peter Lawford called her, inviting her to a casual dinner gathering at his beachside home. He would later recount that her voice sounded incredibly drowsy, slurred, and increasingly distant as the brief conversation went on. According to his account, she ended the conversation abruptly, telling him goodbye in a haunting way that deeply unsettled him. Lawford was so worried that he attempted to reach her again, contacting several people to check on her safety. He even contacted her lawyer, who allegedly checked and reassured him that the actress was perfectly fine for the night. Sometime between 8:30 and 10:30 that night, Marilyn Monroe died alone in her dark bedroom, unnoticed by the world. Around 3:30 in the morning, the housekeeper noticed a light shining from under the firmly locked bedroom door. After frantically calling Dr. Greenson, she looked through the outside window and saw a sight that would haunt Hollywood forever. Marilyn was lying face down on her bed, completely nude, covered by a single white sheet, clutching a phone receiver. Greenson broke through the glass window to enter the locked room and immediately realized that the screen icon was gone. Her personal physician arrived shortly after, officially confirming her death before notifying the local police department of the tragedy. Beside her bed lay several empty medicine bottles, but investigators found absolutely no suicide note explaining her final thoughts. The subsequent autopsy would soon provide specific medical details, but it would completely fail to silence the growing public doubts. Deputy Coroner Thomas Noguchi conducted the highly pressured autopsy that same day, discovering lethal concentrations of pentobarbital and chloral hydrate. The toxic dosages discovered in her blood and liver tissue were several times above the established human lethal limit. The evidence suggested that these massive quantities of drugs had been ingested rapidly within a very short window of time. Yet, there were no signs of external trauma, no evidence of forced entry, and the door was locked. The official medical conclusion delivered to the waiting press was a probable suicide brought on by an intentional acute overdose. Psychiatrists from the Los Angeles Suicide Prevention Center reviewed her extensive personal history to support this official government narrative. They cited her long-standing psychiatric disturbances, her severe abandonment fears, and several prior non-lethal drug overdose attempts where she survived. This time they concluded the tragic pattern had simply repeated itself, but without anyone arriving in time to rescue her. In the following years, numerous independent critics and medical experts heavily questioned various technical aspects of the rushed autopsy report. Some argued that her stomach was completely empty of pill residue, implying she could not have swallowed the massive doses orally. Noguchi later addressed these specific claims, explaining that her heavy drug tolerance could have dramatically accelerated the chemical absorption process. He dismissed alternative allegations of forced administration and denied any meaningful inconsistencies regarding mysterious needle marks on her body. In the early 1980s, after elaborate conspiracy theories had spread globally, the district attorney's office conducted a thorough review. After months of re-examining old files, they officially announced they found no credible evidence pointing to a homicide. They openly acknowledged various investigative discrepancies and unanswered questions, but refused to dispute the original findings of the coroner's office. Public reaction, however, refused to accept this clinical closure, as a massive wave of grief swept across the entire nation. Newspapers reported a disturbing surge in suicide rates across major cities, with citizens mourning the loss of their favorite star. Part 2. The cultural shockwave of Marilyn Monroe's passing transformed her from a Hollywood actress into an eternal symbol of tragedy, sparking decades of intense debate. To the public, she became the ultimate cautionary tale of fame, a brilliant light extinguished by the dark pressures of show business. Her passing exposed the cold, transactional nature of the studio system, which treated human beings as commodities to be exploited until empty. Commentators across the world described her as a helpless victim of a predatory culture that worshipped her image but ignored her pain. Her ex-husband, baseball legend Joe DiMaggio, was absolutely devastated by her death, channeling his immense grief into a quiet, fiercely protective stance. He took complete control of her private funeral arrangements, consciously restricting attendance to a small group of close personal friends. He barred studio executives, political figures, and Hollywood columnists, blaming the entire industry for driving her to an early grave. For 20 years he faithfully arranged for fresh red roses to be delivered to her crypt, a silent tribute to a love that survived. Yet while the world wept for a fallen icon, one powerful voice among her innermost circle was completely unconvinced by the simple explanation. Frank Sinatra simply could not accept the neat, sanitized narrative of a lonely, depressed woman intentionally taking her own life that August night. Sinatra had been exceptionally close to Marilyn during the final tumultuous years of her life, offering her a rare sense of protection. Their complex relationship was widely rumored by gossip columnists to be romantic, but those within their inner circle insisted it was deeper. It was rooted in a profound mutual respect, and a shared understanding of what it meant to live under constant public scrutiny. She confided in him deeply, particularly about her brief, emotionally fraught involvements with powerful political figures who operated at the highest levels. Sinatra admired her intelligence and her resilience, but he also considered her incredibly fragile and vulnerable to manipulation by dangerous men. In the years following her sudden passing, he found himself struggling daily to accept the tidy conclusions of the official police report. Through confidential conversations with his trusted personal attorney and various high-level associates connected to organized crime, Sinatra began to hear much darker narratives. Chilling rumors circulated through his extensive network that Marilyn had been planning a massive public announcement right before she died. Some sources claimed she intended to announce a formal reconciliation with Joe DiMaggio, a move that would have brought stability to her life. Others speculated she was preparing to reveal explosive details about her private relationships with powerful politicians, details that could ruin careers. Sinatra reportedly became absolutely convinced that she would never willingly destroy certain powerful men she still deeply cared for. Yet he believed that others within the political sphere might have feared exposure regardless of her personal feelings or intentions. Dark stories reached his ears suggesting that organized crime figures with complex political connections had a distinct, urgent motive to silence her permanently. He suspected a highly sophisticated hit, a lethal injection administered while she was completely unconscious and later disguised as an overdose. He openly questioned whether local law enforcement authorities had been heavily influenced or intimidated to protect the reputations of powerful dynasties. He never publicly presented concrete proof of these explosive allegations, choosing instead to share his deeply held convictions with trusted friends. Privately, however, he spent significant sums hearing private investigators and quietly reviewing copies of her phone records and conflicting medical reports. He firmly believed that had her planned press appearance not been looming on the horizon, events would have unfolded very differently. To Frank Sinatra, Marilyn's death was not simply a lonely, tragic overdose brought on by untreated mental illness and chronic insomnia. It was a calculated political act hidden behind a convenient medical explanation, designed to protect the status quo of American power. Whether driven by intense grief, absolute personal loyalty, or genuine insider suspicion, Sinatra carried that dark belief for the rest of his life. He felt until his dying day that true justice had not been served for a woman he cared for deeply. But beyond the realm of high-level politics and intricate conspiracy theories, another explanation remains equally tragic and grounded in reality. Academic reviews of Marilyn's final months paint a devastating portrait of a woman systematically destroyed by the very medical system meant to save her. Her chronic insomnia, which had once been a manageable professional hurdle, had transformed into a monstrous, all-consuming chemical dependency. She was being prescribed multiple highly addictive sedatives simultaneously by different doctors who failed to communicate with one another effectively. Her body's rapidly developing tolerance demanded higher and higher doses just to achieve a few hours of artificial, restless unconsciousness. Her personal physicians offered wildly conflicting accounts of what they had actually prescribed her during those final, chaotic weeks of her life. They particularly argued over the presence of chloral hydrate, yet rigorous toxicology tests confirmed its lethal presence within her vital organs. Barbiturates had long been known to modern medical science to cause extreme psychological dependency and a high risk of accidental overdose. The profound dangers associated with mixing these specific chemical compounds were well documented in medical literature even during the early 60s. Still, her psychiatric treatment inexplicably combined intense Freudian psychoanalysis with escalating chemical sedation rather than working to safely reduce her intake. She mistakenly believed she exercised complete control over her personal drug intake, possessing a false sense of security about her physical limits. Without strict centralized medical supervision, and with overlapping prescriptions filling her medicine cabinet, the line between safety and death completely blurred. The night she died, whether she intended to end her life or was simply desperate for sleep, she consumed a lethal amount. No definitive undeniable evidence of a homicide has ever been established by any independent investigative body or law enforcement agency over the decades. The official legal ruling remains unchanged to this day, a probable suicide caused by an acute toxicity of barbiturates and sedatives. Sinatra's dark suspicions remain completely unproven, floating in the realm of Hollywood mythology alongside countless other unsolved celebrity mysteries. The intricate political theories involving Washington elites and organized crime figures remain unresolved, lacking the smoking gun needed for historical certainty. What remains absolutely certain is that the very drugs prescribed to help her sleep ultimately ended her brilliant, troubled life. The woman who feared the lonely silence of insomnia more than anything else was taken by the medication meant to protect her. Her death marks the moment where the golden age of Hollywood lost its innocence, exposing the dark machinery operating beneath the surface. It forces us to look at how we treat icons, transforming human beings into tragic public spectacles for entertainment. The questions surrounding her final hours will likely never be fully answered to everyone's satisfaction, keeping her legend alive forever. Marilyn Monroe remains frozen in time, a symbol of unmatched beauty and profound sorrow, forever searching for a rest she couldn't find. Her story continues to captivate generation after generation, a haunting reminder of the fragile human soul hidden behind the cinematic image. As the decades pass, the noise of the conspiracy theories fades, leaving only the quiet tragedy of a life cut short. The tragedy of Marilyn Monroe lies not just in her sudden end, but in the slow erosion of her personal autonomy. For years she had fought against a studio system that viewed her as a lucrative product rather than a person. She fought for better pay, better scripts, and the respect she rightfully deserved as a major dramatic artist of her generation. Yet as she gained control over her career, she lost control over her private well-being, surrendered to pharmaceutical solutions. The very traits that made her an icon, her sensitivity, her vulnerability, her raw emotional availability, made her susceptible to harm. She felt every slight deeply, carried every trauma of her past into her present, and found no healthy outlet for her pain. In the vacuum of her loneliness, the quiet rooms of her Brentwood home became a crucible of anxiety and sleeplessness. The medical professionals entrusted with her care failed to see the danger building within her daily routine of pills and therapy. They treated the symptoms of her distress while completely ignoring the underlying systemic causes of her profound isolation and exhaustion. The image of Marilyn clutching that telephone receiver in her final moments is a devastating metaphor for her entire adult life. She was a woman constantly reaching out for a genuine connection, searching for someone who could see past the movie star. She reached out to husbands, to lovers, to directors, and to therapists, yet she always seemed to return to loneliness. The public adored her, yet that adoration was based on a carefully constructed illusion that she felt forced to maintain. The pressure to be Marilyn at all times was a crushing weight that stifled her true self, Norma Jean. This division between her public persona and her private reality created a psychological fracturing that grew wider with every passing year. The drugs she took were a desperate attempt to numb the pain of this internal division, to quiet the demands. In the end, the system that created her could not save her from the darkness that its own pressures produced. Her death was a predictable consequence of an industry that treats human vulnerability as a resource to be mined. The enduring fascination with Frank Sinatra's theory speaks to a collective refusal to accept that someone so vibrant could end so quietly. We want there to be a grand narrative, a political conspiracy, a hidden truth that explains away the mundane horror of addiction. It is easier to believe in powerful men pulling strings in the shadows than to face the reality of neglect. Sinatra, who lived a life of immense power and influence, understood the ruthless nature of the world she inhabited. His suspicions were born out of a desire to give her death a meaning beyond a lonely mistake in a bedroom. He wanted her to be a player in a high-stakes game, rather than a victim of a broken medical system. Yet whether there was a conspiracy or not, the outcome remains exactly the same for the woman who died alone. The true conspiracy was the collective failure of everyone around her to protect her from her own escalating self-destruction. It was the silence of an industry that watched her unravel and chose to look the other way as long as she produced. The legacy of Marilyn Monroe is a battlefield where biographers, fans, and conspiracy theorists continue to fight over her memory today. Everyone wants a piece of her story, just as everyone wanted a piece of her life when she was still breathing. She has been cast as a tragic victim, a feminist pioneer, a political casualty, and a cautionary tale of Hollywood. Yet she defies easy categorization, remaining a complex, deeply human figure who lived a life of extraordinary highs and devastating lows. Her films still capture our imagination, showing a luminous talent that transcended the often mediocre material she was given by studios. Her voice, her movements, her comedic timing, and her dramatic depth continue to inspire actors and artists around the globe. but her death casting a long, permanent shadow over her cinematic achievements, forcing us to view her through a lens of tragedy. We cannot look at her smile on screen without remembering how that smile was extinguished in the dark of Brentwood. Her life was a masterpiece of self-creation, but her ending was a tragedy written by the hands of dependency. As we look back at that quiet August night, we are reminded of the fragility of fame and the cost of stardom. The world moved on, the studios found new faces to market, and the political dynasties continued their climb to power. But the ghost of Marilyn Monroe still haunts the collective consciousness of Hollywood, a reminder of the human cost of entertainment. She remains the ultimate symbol of the American dream turned nightmare, a girl who achieved everything only to lose herself completely. Her story teaches us about the danger of losing our humanity in the pursuit of an image created for others. It forces us to question the systems of care we rely on and the true nature of the people we idolize. Marilyn Monroe wanted to be remembered as a good actress, a person who tried her best to bring joy. Instead, she is remembered for her exit, a mystery that will never truly be solved by history or science. The silence of her bedroom remains unbroken, a monument to a woman who finally found the sleep she desperately chased. Part 3. The passing of Marilyn Monroe marked the end of an era, leaving an indelible mark on the landscape of modern celebrity culture. The initial shock of her death quickly gave way to permanent obsession with her final hours, transforming history into mythology. Every detail of that August night has been scrutinized by thousands of investigators, journalists, and fans seeking a hidden truth. Yet, the more we analyze the forensic evidence, the more elusive the real woman behind the legend seems to become. She has been thoroughly institutionalized as the patron saint of Hollywood tragedy, a figure onto whom we project our cultural anxieties. Her image has been commercialized to a degree that completely separates her from the actual human being who suffered and died. We see her face on clothing in art, and in advertisements, a perpetual commodity that never ages or fades away. But this commercial immortality comes at the cost of her genuine human narrative, which was defined by struggle and resilience. She was a woman who fought fiercely for her own survival, even when the forces aligned against her seemed entirely overwhelming. To truly understand her end, one must look at the culture of Hollywood in 1962, a place of transition. The old studio system was collapsing, giving way to an independent era where stars possessed more leverage but faced greater isolation. Marilyn was caught in the middle of this systemic shift, trying to navigate her career without the traditional safety nets. She was attempting to produce her own films, to choose her own directors, and to control her financial destiny directly. This independence made her dangerous to the established powers, who viewed her autonomy as a threat to their corporate control. The intense pressure she faced was not just psychological, it was institutional, a concerted effort to break her independent spirit. Her failures on set were weaponized against her to prove that women could not handle the responsibilities of production power. The narrative of her instability was convenient for executives who wanted to justify their own corporate mismanagement and financial failures. In this context, her reliance on medication was not just a personal flaw but a symptom of institutional warfare. The medical profession must also bear a significant portion of the historical responsibility for the tragic outcome of her life. The doctors who treated Marilyn were among the most prominent in Beverly Hills, yet their care was shockingly reckless and uncoordinated. They allowed themselves to be swayed by her celebrity status, granting her access to dangerous chemicals to maintain her favor. They participated in a system of enabling that prioritized short-term comfort over long-term health and stability for their patient. The combination of psychoanalysis and heavy sedation was a toxic methodology that left her emotionally raw and physically impaired simultaneously. She was forced to confront her deepest psychological traumas in therapy, while her brain chemistry was being systematically altered by barbiturates. This approach created a state of perpetual emotional turbulence, making it impossible for her to find true psychological stability. The lack of communication between her various physicians allowed her to manipulate her prescriptions, accelerating her dangerous descent into addiction. It was a failure of medical ethics and clinical judgment that ultimately carried a fatal price for the star. Frank Sinatra's perspective on her death, while unproven, reflects a deep understanding of the corrupt systems operating during that era. Sinatra knew firsthand how power functioned in America, having navigated the worlds of entertainment, politics, and organized crime successfully. He knew that reputations were worth killing for, and that powerful men would stop at nothing to protect their positions. His belief that Marilyn was silenced to prevent a political scandal was not born out of thin air or paranoia. It was based on his knowledge of the individuals she was involved with and the ruthlessness of their world. He saw her as a liability to powerful entities who could not afford to have their secrets revealed. While history has not produced the evidence to validate his claims, his suspicions remind us of the dark context. Marilyn was not living in a vacuum, she was moving through circles where power was absolute and human life was cheap. Her proximity to power made her vulnerable to forces that operated completely outside the boundaries of the law and morality. The tragedy of her death is compounded by the fact that she was actively trying to save herself in the end. Her final interviews show a woman who was looking forward to the future, planning new projects and expressing hope. She was not a defeated soul giving up on life, she was a fighter trying to reclaim her position. This makes the official ruling of probable suicide difficult for many who knew her energy to fully accept. It suggests a sudden, catastrophic shift in her mental state that seems inconsistent with her recent professional actions and plans. Yet addiction is a disease that operates in the shadows, capable of overwhelming even the strongest will in a moment. Desperation for sleep can drive a person to take risks they would never consider in the clear light of day. The lethal combination of drugs in her system may have been an accident born of exhaustion rather than a conscious choice. The truth of her intent died with her in that bedroom, leaving us to debate her final thoughts forever. The public's refusal to let Marilyn Monroe rest in peace is a testament to the profound connection she forged. She possessed a rare quality that made people feel protective of her, even though they only knew her on screen. Her vulnerability was real, and it spoke directly to the hidden pain and isolation of millions of ordinary people worldwide. When she died, it felt like a personal loss to her fans, an assault on their own hopes and dreams. The conspiracy theories are a way for the public to mourn her, to refuse to accept her lonely end. By turning her death into a mystery, we keep her story active, ensuring that she is never truly forgotten. We refuse to let her be just another statistic of the Hollywood machine that grinds up talent for profit. Her legend grows stronger with each passing year, fueled by our collective need to find a deeper meaning in her tragedy. She remains an enigma, a puzzle with pieces that will never fit together perfectly, keeping us permanently intrigued. The story of Marilyn Monroe is ultimately a story about the high cost of the American dream of fame. She came from nothing, an orphan girl who transformed herself through sheer will and talent into the most famous woman. She achieved everything that society tells us is valuable: wealth, beauty, international fame, and the adoration of millions of men. Yet none of these achievements could protect her from the fundamental human need for safety, stability, and peace of mind. Her life shows that the rewards of celebrity are an illusion that cannot sustain the human spirit in isolation. The spotlight does not warm the soul, it burns it away, leaving a vacuum that is easily filled by darkness. Her tragedy is a warning about the dangers of worshipping an image at the expense of the real person. We must learn to see the humanity behind the glamour, to protect the vulnerable spirits who entertain us all. Marilyn gave everything she had to her audience, and in return, she was consumed by the very flame she created. As we close this investigation into her life and death, we are left with the image of a star. A woman who is both powerful and fragile, a symbol of an era that still captures our collective imagination today. Her death remains a shadow over Hollywood, a reminder of the secrets that lie hidden beneath the golden California sun. Whether she was a victim of a political conspiracy or a casualty of her own medical treatment, she remains gone. No amount of analysis, no new evidence, and no historical retrospective can bring Norma Jean back to the world. We can only honor her memory by remembering her as she truly was, a complex, brilliant, and deeply feeling woman. She fought her battles with courage, lived her life with passion, and left a legacy that will never be erased. The noise of the world has faded, the cameras have stopped rolling, and the applause has finally gone quiet for her. In the end, the woman who couldn't sleep has found her peace, leaving us to guard her memory forever. The impact of Marilyn's death on the film industry led to a slow, painful reevaluation of how studios treated talent. Actors began to demand better protections, more personal time, and control over their healthcare choices away from studio executives. The absolute dominance of the old moguls began to slip as stars realized the fatal cost of corporate exploitation. Yet the lessons were learned slowly, and many others would fall victim to the same pressures in the years. The pharmaceutical industry continued to grow, providing new ways to medicate the anxieties of a highly demanding modern society. The cycle of dependency that claimed Marilyn remained a persistent threat to creative minds working under the intense spotlight. Her passing stands as a monument to the necessity of true mental health support in a world of pressure. It reminds us that behind every icon is a human being who needs care, compassion, and true understanding. Marilyn Monroe's true tragedy was that she lived in a time that was not ready to save her. Today, her Brentwood home stands as a quiet historic site, a physical marker of the spot where history changed. Fans still gather near the property, leaving flowers and notes to express a love that has lasted decades. The room where she spent her final hours has been written about in countless books, yet it keeps secrets. The telephone she clutched remains a symbol of a final, unanswered cry for help that echoes through time today. We will never know who she was trying to reach, or what she wanted to say in those moments. We only know that the call was cut short, leaving an empty line that history cannot fill for us. Her voice is preserved in her films, a permanent record of her warmth, her humor, and her unique light. That light continues to shine through the darkness of her tragic end, inspiring new generations of film lovers. Marilyn Monroe belongs to the ages now, a star that burns bright in the night sky of our culture.